Hi, welcome to my little bookish corner of the internet. My name's Harriet. This is going to be a review of the Lord of the Rings series by J.R.R. Tolkien. All three books in the trilogy. I haven't read The Hobbit yet, but it is on my TBR, so this will be a review of just the three books. This is the beautiful edition that I got at a book swap, so I was lucky enough to find this and I started it as soon as I could. I really wanted to get to this. It's been on my TBR for a really long time, but I just hadn't had the chance to pick it up. And honestly, it was quite daunting because it's a huge book. It did take me just under a month to read all three books because I haven't been reading that much in the month of February. But I'm so happy that I got to get to it eventually and that I finished it. Everything is still very fresh in my mind because I only finished it a couple of days ago, so I'm really excited to talk about it. I have also got all of my notes here in my little notebook because there's a lot that I want to touch on. I want to make sure that I don't miss out on anything. But I'm also going to try and be really careful not to spoil anything for you either. So there will be a couple of main plot points that I talk about for the first book, but then from then on it's just more about how the books made me feel, what I thought about them, and just my general thoughts and feelings about the trilogy in itself. So I hope you enjoy. Before we get started on the review, I would love to talk about where I buy my books from. I use a UK-based website called Blackwell's. They offer free shipping within the UK and great shipping options for international as well. They are a trusted seller and a small independent business too, so I will leave a link to their website down below. Full disclosure, it is an affiliate link, so if you do click on it and buy anything from their website, I will get a very small commission. But I'm really happy to be working with this company, so I thought I'd put that in before we start. Okay, so a little bit of background about my experience with Lord of the Rings before I read these books. I recently, through the first lockdown, watched all of the Lord of the Rings films and the extended editions with my partner. So I have seen them all, and honestly I do think that they helped me understand the book. I will touch on this through the review. I do think they are brilliant films, so I think that pushed me to want to read the books even more. Yeah, just letting you know that I had a bit of background from watching the films and I'm very glad that I did. So let's get into the first book. So the first book in the series is called The Fellowship of the Ring. I have to be really careful with this edition because it's kind of falling apart a little bit. I did have to super glue some parts because this cover was falling off, so it's really holding in there. Anyway, The Fellowship of the Ring. So this is our introduction to Middle-earth, which is where the whole of the Lord of the Rings trilogy is set. We are predominantly following Frodo Baggins, who is a hobbit. You do get to learn about all these different creatures and people within Middle-earth while you are reading it, so it explains who the hobbits are and everything, so don't worry about that. Anyway, yeah, we are following Frodo and his fellow hobbits as they are sent on a journey to protect and destroy a ring of power that in the hands of the Dark Lord called Sauron will bring death and destruction and darkness to the whole of Middle-earth. This to me is like pinnacle fantasy, typical story. I know this is one of the first, so a lot of the books that I have read recently will have been based off and inspired by the Lord of the Rings. So it was really cool for me to read this and see where all of those different tropes come from. And they mainly come from this. It's so cool. I cannot believe how long ago this series was made because it feels really modern, but that's obviously just because the modern books that are written these days take so much from the Lord of the Rings that they're quite similar. But it was great. It was so nice to read that and have kind of like tropes and storylines that I'm used to reading anyway from modern day fantasy. So yeah, it's like typical fantasy adventure quest. It was great. You may want a hot drink while you watch this, by the way, because I do think it's going to be quite a long video. Sorry about that. So not only do you have these fantastical and adventurous fun events going on, there is also a great sense of urgency and doom throughout all of these stories, but especially in the first one because it goes from you seeing the lives of these hobbits and Frodo and their friendships and relationships with each other to them going on this quest and meeting loads and loads of new people, loads of new characters, and having loads of things happen to them too. So yeah, there's a lot of urgency and there's a lot of pressure resting on Frodo and his fellow hobbits to get this quest done. We are also shown so much of the land that this is set in. I am baffled by how incredibly well written this is. The fact that someone can write such a rich and wonderful land for these characters to be in, so not only have incredible characters and relationships, but also have this amazing land that also has different languages and ways of speaking. It's just incredible. I was astounded by it the whole time that I was reading it. Yeah, the world is just impeccable and unreal, and Tolkien really does deserve all the credit he gets for this world. It's amazing. It is so popular for a reason. I mean, it's typical proper fantasy. It's what you want from a fantasy novel. Yeah, if you can't tell, my mind is just completely blown and I can't believe I haven't read this series before, but yeah, it's great. Anyway, yeah, there is a lot of everything. So this might be something that people struggle with. There is a lot of characters, there's a lot of richness, lands that you have to remember. Sometimes it does get a bit difficult, and this is where I feel like watching the films helped me to visualise the way that Middle-earth is a little bit more, and also even follow the story a little bit better. But after the first book, I kind of sunk into it and I got around that. I realised that you don't have to learn every single character because they don't all come up again. And all of the main characters are created well enough that you do remember them. So yeah, that was done really well, but there is a lot. So if you are quite new to fantasy, this might be a bit heavy. I would still recommend reading it at some point, but maybe start with some lighter fantasy to begin with and then move on to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Anyway, I went on a bit of a tangent there. So the first book, Fellowship of the Ring, we are following Frodo, Merry, Pippin and Sam as they journey towards a meeting point with Gandalf, who is a wizard, and he's told them that he's going to meet them at a certain place at a certain time, but things go wrong for both parties, for Gandalf and for the hobbits. With regards to the wizards, there is a lot of lore behind them that you can learn about. It's not in the trilogy. There are a couple bits and pieces, but you don't really learn a lot about why the magic is there and why they don't use it all the time, because Gandalf doesn't use his magic an awful lot. But there are ways that you can learn about that are very accessible. So if that's something that interests you and that you think would add more richness to the story, then definitely go ahead and read that. I think it would be really interesting. For me personally, it didn't really add or take away from the story, so I'm quite happy just reading the trilogy for now and then maybe in the future learning a bit more about the lore. But I thought I would add that in because I know some people enjoy the story a bit more when there's more that they can understand from it. Okay, so while the hobbits are on this journey to go to this meeting point to meet with Gandalf, they encounter some really dark forces that are at work. For example, there are the Ringwraiths, who are kind of like messengers and servants of Sauron. And I should note that Sauron is kind of like this bodiless being. So he was destroyed, but his soul survived. And if he gets this ring, then he will be able to come back properly. So while he is bodiless, he sends out these Ringwraiths and orcs, which are like a whole other being. But there are other dark forces as well, like dark forests where trees have minds of their own. There's pretty much magic everywhere as well. So like I said, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on. You obviously have the main plot, but you also have other tangents that the story goes into. And it was a lot of fun to read. It was very adventurous, very cool. Particularly in this section of the book before they go to the meeting point, there's quite a lot that isn't put in the films, even the extended edition. So there is so much packed into this first book. There is a lot going on, whereas the other two I feel like they're a bit more spaced out. They're still very adventurous and there's a lot of stuff in there. But the first one, there's so many different plot points, but it's not hard to keep up with. And it also meant that I was surprised the whole time that I was reading it, which was great. I was worried because I'd watched the films there wasn't going to be that much that was different, but there really was. The further on you get into the book and the series as well, the more you get to see of Middle-earth and you get more of an idea of the scale of it and how large it is. And you also get to see just how Sauron is spreading the darkness throughout the lands. There is a lot of tension throughout and lots of peril for our main characters too. Literally from the get-go, we are showing the relationships between the characters. They are established really well and they're also really great in their own right. For example, Sam is lovely. He is such a wonderful character. You really root for him. You can't help but love him. And the friendship and relationship between Gimli the dwarf and Legolas the elf is amazing. I really loved reading their interactions with each other. There's a lot of backstory around why that is so special and important that these two characters are friends, but I will leave that, if you don't know, for you to find out in the books because it's just amazing. I really loved it. As the story progresses, we get to see a fellowship that's formed. So this is a group of beings and people that will accompany Frodo and the hobbits to take the ring to Mount Doom, which is the only place that it can be destroyed because it was where the ring was forged. But of course, not everything goes to plan. That's pretty much the synopsis for the first book. I'm not going to say too much about the other two books in terms of plot because I feel like it might ruin some things for you and I really don't want to do that. I feel like you should go into this book as blindly as you can. I just feel like it will make it so much more special for you that way. The wonderful thing about this book was that because it's so rich and so intense and there's so much laying on these characters, as soon as I finished the first book, I really wanted to get into the second one. So it really does push you through. Even though there is a lot to remember and lots going on, it didn't make me want to stop reading or anything like that. If anything, it made me want to read it more. So that was really well done. Sometimes when books have too much in it, it kind of freaks me out and I don't want to read it anymore. But with this, it was just done so beautifully and so well. I couldn't stop reading it. And then we get on to the second book, which is The Two Towers. This was maybe my favourite from the trilogy. I don't know really what it was about it, but it was just amazing. I really, really loved it. It had the right level of intensity, action, but also loads and loads of character development, which is one of my favourite things in a story. I think I also liked that this was split into various different perspectives. So with the first one, you're kind of following the Fellowship as a whole, but in the second one we get to see the characters a bit more individually. Some of them do split off and we get to see them on their own storylines, which was really, really fun. The second book also continues directly on from the first one. Because I have it in this bigger book, I turned the page and I was like, this is book one. But if it wasn't, it was book two. It just continues straight on from it. So I would probably read them quite close together. If you do enjoy the first one, go straight into the second one and you'll be good to go. This book is where things start getting a bit more action-packed and intense. There are some really great battles in here. We also get to see some characters go their own way, which, like I said, means that you get to follow their storylines separately, which I thought drove me through the book a lot faster than the first one. The only downside to this book, I would say, is there are a lot of new characters, to the point where I don't really remember all of them. I don't mind because you still have the main ones that you stick with, and you do get introduced to some more prominent characters, which you do remember. But yeah, it did get a bit confusing at times. I had to keep going back and being like, who is this character? Because I don't really remember. But other than that, it was fantastic. I should say also the Fellowship of the Ring for me was a 4.5 because it wasn't perfect, but The Two Towers and The Return of the King, which is the last one, 5-star reads. So overall, this 5-star trilogy for me, it's amazing. What I really appreciated about the second book was it wasn't a filler. So sometimes with a series or a trilogy, the middle book or books can sometimes feel like they're just stretching out the story a little bit until you get to the conclusion. But there is so much that happens in this that it is a really great middle book. Everything feels very necessary and important to continue the story along on the path that it's going on. We also get to hear a bit more about Saruman, who is another wizard. Now, he wasn't very prominent in the first book, so not a lot of the characters that we followed in the Fellowship of the Ring know much about what Saruman has been up to, but we get to find out in the second one, and it's really cool. This was an extremely thrilling read. Again, I have to mention just how incredible I think it is that Tolkien came up with this world and had all these characters in his head and managed to put them in a book in such a way that we fall in love with all of them. It's just baffling how rich they are, and I'm very, very impressed. And then finally we are on to the third book, which is The Return of the King. Wow. So this was the perfect conclusion for me. I very rarely get to the last book in a series and think, wow, that was the most perfect conclusion I could have ever hoped for. But this did that for me. It's split into various different perspectives, so similar to the second one, which again just drove me faster through the book. I finished it quite quickly. This one is definitely the most action-packed. There are some huge battles in this. There is quite a lot of violence and death, so just be wary of that, of course. And you also really get to see the darkness seeping into Middle-earth now. It is affecting pretty much everything. People, landscapes, all of it. You also get to feel a real sense of urgency when it comes to Sauron, because he knows that something is going on but he's not quite sure what, and all he wants, he's so desperate for this ring so that he can regain his full power. But at the moment he is exercising as much of his power as he can by sending out other forces to kind of do his bidding for him, which I think is really essential for his character. It shows that he has no respect and no regard for others. He is more than happy for other people and other beings to die for him. So I thought that was really important for that to be in the story. And while this book was definitely a lot more action-packed than the other two, I also think that it focuses a lot more on the relationships and friendships with the various characters, because obviously they're all in mortal danger at the moment. So not only are they trying to protect themselves, but they're also trying to protect the people that they love. And I think that that's a really important part of the story. Like I say, I adore any kind of good character development, good characters, relationships. So that was a really, really fun part for me to read. We get to see a lot more of the friendship between Sam and Frodo, which is really lovely. Though I do like that all of the characters that we follow are kind of in the same level of danger. They're all in great peril, so you do root for all of them as opposed to just one character or just a couple of characters. You want the good guys to win. Or maybe you don't, but I mean, that's a personal thing. But the last part of this novel, the last half especially, is really difficult to read. Not because loads of dark stuff happens or anything like that. It actually gets less violent the further along that you get. But just because of how uncomfortable the situation that these characters are in is, it's just so difficult to read because you can't think of anything worse to go through. So it's hard for you to read about these characters that you love go through these things. And you also feel like you're right there with them, and where they are is not very nice. So yeah, it definitely brings you into the land of Middle-earth. The end of this book, for me personally, was paced perfectly because it didn't drag, but it didn't feel too rushed. It didn't feel like you just wanted to get to the end of it. And there's also kind of various parts where you think it could end, and then something else happens and you think, okay, what's going to happen now? Again, referring back to the films, I prefer the ending in the book to the films, but I think that's definitely going to be a personal preference thing. I don't love action, so the pacing and the way that this last book ended for me personally was a lot better. I enjoyed it a lot more, whereas the films are very like action-packed, everything is happening all at once, it's crazy, it's mad. That's too much for me. I like something that is a little bit more mellow, still some action in there, lots of tension, but overall the ending for me, yeah, was pretty much perfect. One thing I found really interesting, and I've spoken with my partner about this as well, are the themes of industrialization versus the natural order of things. Everything that Saruman and Sauron do, who are like the baddies, seems very industrialized, destroying all these natural landscapes to make way for big war camps and weaponries, and they're basically taking away the magic of nature, so all of the old magic that comes with nature. For example, the Ents, which are the trees that move and speak, they're kind of part of the old magic and nature. Yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting and powerful message to put across, especially for the time that Tolkien was alive for. So, to conclude, 5-star trilogy, it's fantastic. I can't wait to read The Hobbit, but I have got quite a lot of books on my TBR, which you might have seen from my previous video, but I will get to it one day. I have also watched those films. In regard to the films, the Lord of the Rings ones, I would say try and enjoy them in their own right because they are equally as good as each other but separate. Some of the characters are really similar, such as Sam. He's done perfectly in the films. I think he's great. Also Gandalf is a really good character, but I did prefer book Frodo to film Frodo because I feel like you get to know him a bit better. You get to experience what he experiences a little bit more and understand why he makes the decisions he makes and why he is the way he is. Yeah, I just think he's better depicted and more established in the books, but obviously there's more time to get to know characters in books than there is films. So like I say, just try and enjoy them separately if you can. But if you do watch the films before the books, it might help you to understand the characters and what's going on a little bit more, because like I say, there's a lot going on. So yeah, that is my little review of this big chunky boy. It was a heavy read. It took me a little while, but I am very glad that I read it. I think it's great. I'll probably reread it in the future, and I do totally get the hype behind it. I get why people love it so much. Can we take a second also just to appreciate how beautiful this edition is? So I got this at a local book swap. It's kind of like a old telephone box that they have made into a library almost. While the libraries are closed or have limited services, my local one is only open 2 days a week for like an hour. So this is a nice alternative while they are shut or not open fully. Yeah, I'm so glad I found it and so glad that I read it. Let me know down below if you have read these books before, what you thought of them, or if you've watched the films, are interested in reading the books. Like I say, I buy most of my new books from Blackwell, so there'll be a link down below that you can click and you can look for the Lord of the Rings books on there. If you're in the UK, they will offer free UK shipping for you as well, which is really lovely. And let me know down below what you're currently reading as well. I would love to know what you're getting through at the moment. I'm currently reading Emma, and I'm about a third of the way through it. And I started it 2 days ago, so I am very much enjoying that. It's been nice to go from such a heavy read into something nice and light. But yeah, that is it for today. I hope you have a really lovely rest of your day. Thank you for watching my video, and I will see you in my next one.